Welcome. I'm Marco Davis, President and CEO of CHCI, and thank you for joining us for our CEO conversation. I'm joined today by none other than Jamie Dimon, the Chairman and CEO of JPMorgan Chase & Company. Jamie, thanks for being here. We're really excited to be able to talk with you.
I'm thrilled you came to see me, and I'm thrilled to be doing this. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, first off, just asking, how is New York doing?
Yeah.
How are you all facing now that it seems like things have gotten better?
Well, I would say not great. I mean, if you look at New York, I mean, I hope it's great. We walk around, you saw it's much better than it was before, but businesses aren't still back here. The restaurants are suffering. I think the poor neighborhoods are having a terrible time. Unemployment's way up. Crime is up. So and you know, tax revenues are down, all that. So we're facing a kind of a difficult time. We should gotta be very thoughtful about it.
Still a long way from being out of the woods, huh?
Yes.
Well, speaking of New York, you're, I think, sometimes described as kind of a quintessential New Yorker.
I grew up in Jackson Heights, right down there, and which you can almost see where I grew up from these windows over here. So yeah, I'm a quintessential New Yorker.
Given the life you've led, are there lessons from your childhood, from growing up, anything you think that you carry with you that are the kinds of things people could learn from?
Yeah. Well, but my parents were real moralists. So you do the right thing. You only do the right thing. You treat everyone equally and fairly. My mom was one of the earliest women's liberals around after reading, some of those books and stuff like that. So, so you learn a lot from that. Back then it was much tougher. And today the words people use, that back then the slang they used, racial slangs, was like every race and religion.
Yeah, a lot of good progress. Now, of course, for none of us, life is ever easy. We face our share of challenges and setbacks. Are there any particularly that stand out in your mind that you learned from, that you overcame, that would be kind of insightful for folks?
I'll give you two. Some is like more personal. So I had throat cancer, which is kind of tough, and I had a heart surgery recently. And I think, I don't know what lessons you learn from that, other than you're lucky to be alive. We're lucky to be in America, because I don't think I would have survived had I had this heart problem I had maybe in a lot of other countries. And it does make you be a little more deliberate. I mean, what are you doing? What do you want to get done? How much time do you have on this planet? Things like that. The other one I think is maybe more instructive to people, which is, I was fired from a job. I mean, all of us have had setbacks. And a lot of people in their personal lives, their professional lives. And it's not that you can't cry about it. It's not that you can't get depressed. It's not that you can't, but you got to get over it. You got to learn from it and move on. I was fired by a guy who worked for 15 years. I was surprised, and kind of this fall from grace and stuff like that. And there's life after death. You just got to keep on going and not spend all your time looking backwards. It's not about revenge. It's about moving forward.
Yeah, and clearly you're an excellent testament of a second act, right? Of getting back up and rising above. And you are highly regarded for effective leadership, both your management of the corporations you lead, but I think really as a model public figure. Do you have a kind of a philosophy or approach? Is there a way in which you think about your leadership that folks could learn from?
Yeah, and I write a lot about this too and stuff like that. And of course, I've learned a lot of this by watching other people, learning from other people. So it's not like you're born with DNA, but I think you are born with some things. So a piece. First of all, is the discipline, analytics, work ethic, over and over and over. People would be surprised. The analytics and detail and reporting and discipline and transparency, and it's much more than people think.
Right.
But that's not the best part, the most important part of leadership. The most important part of leadership, particularly as you move up an organization, I'm going to say, is the EQ, humility, and by that what I mean is, do you earn people's respect? Do people want to work for you? People don't want to work for a jerk, People don't want to work for someone who blames them when something goes wrong, who is always scapegoating. They want to work for someone they trust and respect, who wants to make them better. So you can be tough on people. Humility doesn't mean humble, but it means you realize you don't know everything.
Gotcha.
You've got a lot to learn. Those people are more experts in these areas than you are. Your job, you're more like, no longer the quarterback, you're more like the coach of the team, trying to get the best out of everybody. And it's kind of a different thing. And the EQ around that is, do you recognize when people are hurt? Could you have empathy for people? Do you understand that person is not speaking up and maybe they have something to add, and you kind of go out of your way? So it's this whole range of stuff is not normally considered leadership, but it's kind of love, humanity, respect of people that make it real leaders.
Yeah, well, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, we often talk about the fact that particularly in our community, but I think really anywhere, that leadership is not so much about the individual, even though it feels that way when you read the textbooks, but like I think you just said, it's really about the people you're leading, right? And working with them, responding to them. And since these are CEO conversations, what would you say is something that's a particularly kind of challenging or tough aspect or tough decisions you make as a CEO? Anything that stands out in your mind?
You better be pretty tough. I mean, you're under constant, first of all, some of the other things, so a lot of decisions are waiting to be found. Okay. You do the work, you get the right people in the room. You're not sitting there guessing. Isn't like I go to my office and I think, oh my God. But the people decisions are the hardest. And the hardest to make, the easiest to make a mistake, the hardest to correct. You know, in other words, I have to do the right thing. The right thing is not always easy to do. Yeah. And if I don't do the right thing, the organization hurts. And so that to me is probably the hardest aspect of it. But again, the more you have very good people around you, the easier it is to identify them, think about them, figure out the resolution. And even if you have to remove people from their jobs or something like that, which you have to do, do it respectfully. Don't embarrass people. Don't hang them out to dry. You know, if they worked at a company for 20 years, just because they may not be the best player for that position anymore, it doesn't mean you should embarrass them. So there are a lot of ways to do things to do them right. But, you know, like a lot of people, I avoid some of the tough decisions too. But I make a list, like literally on the weekends, about what am I avoiding? Oh, wow. What have you told me, Jamie, it's time for you to, you're allowing this to go on for too long, and problems don't age well. Yeah. So I try to be very open to hear from you, and then to make sure it goes on a list somewhere that I say, Jay, just focus on it. Don't allow it to go get bad or get worse, something like that. And do you have the right people involved in the decision? You know, what's the process by which you make an intelligent decision? And like I said, it's not guessing. Right. Everyone should have a decision-making process about who they speak to and how they look at their options, how they really think it through fairly before they make a decision. Wow, that's great. That's a lot of really important and useful information. Thanks for that. So let's switch gears a little bit. We were talking about this just a little bit regarding New York. COVID-19 obviously is sort of changing, frankly, everything, right, in our society. How would you say that JPMorgan Chase and Company in particular, but really the banking industry in general, how have they responded to COVID-19? What's their role in all this? And in particular, how do you see the dynamics with relation to the Hispanic community? Yeah. So can I put it on a broader perspective? Yeah. So you had COVID-19, and you know, it's uncovered a lot of terrible things that we didn't fix in society, and you had the murder of George Floyd. Yes. Yeah. But in both cases, they're uncovering things we already knew about. I mean, the black community hasn't had parity since the Civil War, and we've been talking about it. And COVID-19, most disasters hurt the poor communities worse than they hurt the rich communities. Yep. That's true for hurricanes, it's true for pandemics, it's true for recessions, and but it shows you the mistakes we've made in society. And if you made a list of those mistakes, and they're all around policy, around how we do safety nets, around healthcare, around inner city school education, around job creation, around infrastructure, around small business formation. And so, you know, so a lot of these big companies have always been very good at trying to be good corporate citizens, good community citizens. And, you know, to help in a million different ways. And banks, of course, are much broader than that, you know, since we're involved in financing so many people. But one of the wonderful things that has come out of COVID-19 and the murder of George Floyd is now you see a lot of society saying it's time to do more. So the Business Roundtable, which I used to be the chairman of, I no longer am, has said we're going to do more for the Latinx community and the black community, and real stuff. So we've always done philanthropy, and we've always done affordable housing, and we've always done, you know, training and diversity and recruiting and all these various things, but to do more, double down. So we have groups now that are working on how can you get more capital into black small businesses. We have a thing called the Entrepreneur of Color Fund. And it's actually for Latinx and for black, you know, to go beyond normal banking to get loans to entrepreneurs of color. You know, affordable housing, you know, to do more affordable housing, but to get more money into it. So, you know, we do billions of dollars a year, but now I'm getting calls from other big companies saying, I want to do it too, I don't know how to. Oh, wow. So we're saying, okay, we're going to try to create more funds that they can do that. So small business, but and probably the biggest is education. Okay. So, you know, my wife does a tremendous amount of work in the South Bronx, but take the South Bronx. They were doing better and better and better. Now unemployment, I'm say 30%. Oof. They don't have as much living space. A lot of people are going to food banks for food. The kids didn't have computers. So my wife went out of her way to get, you know, computers and food to tens of thousands of kids. Oh, that's personal. This was not a JPMorgan thing. Though JPMorgan does a lot of that stuff too. But you know, now the unemployment is like 30%. So we just started something in New York called the New York City Jobs Council, where CEOs are going to be involved in helping the disadvantaged, work in the community college in New York, CUNY, I mean, which is got
Right.
500,000 people. But the goal, and we all have a common goal, not is to get you through school, whether it's high school or a community college or college, where when you get out, you have a living wage.
Yes.
Okay, so in Bronx, they have the Alfred E. Smith School. 85% of these kids graduate and they make $45,000 a year because they've learned how to maintain automobiles. And of course, they're largely a minority. The Aviation High School right across the bridge over here, Long Island City, 95% of the kids, I forgot how many 95% graduate, average comp, $60,000 maintaining small aircraft. And of course, they travel 2 or 3 hours a day. Their parents want them to go there.
Yeah.
So jobs, education, and jobs and communities, and I do think the business community should help lift up society.
Yeah.
One of the things the business community, the big companies, which I think they already do a great job with their own employees, their own health care, their own philanthropy, all these various things, but also they could drive by, literally and figuratively, the worst neighborhoods of America.
Yes.
And they shouldn't.
Yeah.
They should get involved in fixing it. Government, with all due respect, government alone can't do it. These things are complex problems. They need real policy and real solutions. They need sustained effort, money, capital, time. We need to test what works and what doesn't work. We got a lot of programs that never worked, but we have a common interest. We, teachers, the unions, everyone say, we want these kids to graduate and get these fabulous jobs and lift up all society. If you lift up all of society, by the way, and this is important for everyone, everyone's better off. It's better social outcomes, it's less crime, it's more jobs. I tell people, if Canada, and people act like it's a zero-sum game, if Canada was a failed country, that would be terrible for America, economically, socially, military, et cetera. So if we can get South Bronx up to Canada, it's great for America. And I think you're going to have, it's a consolidated effort of civic society, schools, teachers, unions, business, who's got the wherewithal, the capability, the capital, and the knowledge, and government, who's got to help. And we all have to work together if we're going to fix these problems. And the first thing we got to do is acknowledge the problem. Like 50% of the kids in inner city schools do not graduate. And a lot of the kids who do graduate are not prepared for a job. And that is a flaw which it's gone on generational now. It's unfair, it's unjust, it's wrong, it needs to be fixed.
Well, and you touched on something that is something that we talk about at CHCI, which is this idea of not just the interplay, but to be effective, needing familiarity with the various sectors, right? We suggest and encourage our leaders to get experience in public policy, right, by interning or doing their fellowships on Capitol Hill. But we encourage them to also get to know the private sector, to work in the nonprofit sector. Do you think that's something that can be beneficial for a leader to have, ideally even firsthand knowledge in the various sectors? Does that maybe make them more effective in their work when they get focused?
I had a friend who was a very liberal, very, very smart Harvard Law guy. He wanted to work for judges and stuff like that. He wanted to try business, and I got him a job at a company, and he was shocked how that the people were mostly ethical, trying to do the right thing. Not that companies don't make mistakes; they make huge mistakes. But also those of us in the private sector don't necessarily know what it's like to be the demands in government. Absolutely. If I can walk in your moccasins a little bit, you can walk in mine a little bit, we're going to be better off in how we understand each other. And I always ask people who've been on one side or the other or both, why don't you write up a piece of paper like, okay, lessons to, Congress folk that now that I'm in Congress, but I was a business person, and vice versa. Lessons from people in Congress who've been in business, what would you teach the business people who aren't in Congress? So absolutely, I think there's nothing like that kind of thing.
That's great. That's awesome.
We used to have much more of that in this country. If you look at what's happened in the country, less and less did people do different things. So we don't, we have less and less of the citizen Congress folks.
That's true.
Right. And I think we would all be better off to spend time with each other.
I think there's much too much specialization these days. Let's talk a little bit about the Latino community specifically, the Latinx community, and JPMC. How do you think you all are doing as a firm vis-a-vis the community? What are you hearing from your employees, from the communities you serve?
So, we've had diversity efforts for years, but many years ago, I sat down and they were talking about how great we're doing, with diversity in total. But I said, no, let's do it by group, not, so we did LGBT, women, Hispanic, disaggregate. And the fact is, for the most part, we're doing great with all of them other than black. We were doing better with black than most companies, better than venture capital, private equity, law firms, and stuff like that, but not JPMorgan good. So, but with the Latinx community, and we have Adelante, I think we had 17,000 employees who were part of that, really good. We were one of the first to do matricular cards. I went to see them. They said, Jamie, all we need is a little more help in organization to do more. And one of my of all my direct reports, two, I think they're like 13 or 14, two are LGBT, one is Hispanic, two are Brits, more than 50% of women. So, in some ways good, but it does not mean you can't do better. So I think if if your folks came and they met with our people, that you'd say, no, Jamie, you can do this better, you can do that, but I'm sure that's true. And so, but we do a tremendous amount of the Latinx community. And we're always focusing on it. We have Spanish-enabled call centers and documents and stuff like that. And
I assume you're targeting investments, right, given some of the communities you serve?
We're targeting investments. So everything we're doing for entrepreneurs of color is Latinx and black.
Okay, oh, great.
Advancing black pathways, affordable housing, it's both.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of that has to go to poor neighborhoods. Because if you want to attack the problem, you got to go to the neighborhood, and that also includes poor white people. Who are also wrapped up in this cycle of poverty and things like that. So, so there's always more to do.
And on the philanthropic side, I know you all are making some investments, some commitments. Anything stand out in your mind of some of the work that you're doing that you want to highlight?
So I'm going to give you a concrete example because it's maybe more important. So we do a lot of money, but think of JPMorgan, there's philanthropy, which is grants, money. There's people capital, which is enormous, and maybe if you went to somewhere place, they'd say, no, JPMorgan, their money helped, their people helped even more. So we actually, have second people to help some of these organizations. And then there's a lot of lending we do on top of that. So take it on affordable housing. We'll advise the person. We'll put in a grant money sometimes for equity to help me get going, and then we'll lend $100 million.
Wow.
So we kind of do this. So the effort itself is huge. We do it around the world. One of the benefits about that is people don't believe it, but there are slums in Paris. There are kids who don't have jobs in Paris. But you learn, what do people do in Switzerland around apprenticeships? What do they do in Germany around apprenticeships? How do you make society work better for everybody? And then we disseminate that. So we have this huge effort taking place, but what we did in Detroit is maybe the most important, where we learned the most. We said, we're going to go in, all of us, as opposed to your affordable housing, your small business, one group, sustained effort. It was, I think, $200 million over 5 or 6 years, working with civic society, the mayor who's outstanding there, doing schools, affordable housing, education. We changed laws so we can give second chance to formerly incarcerated folks, and it really makes a difference. So if you went to talk to the mayor, they say JPMorgan has helped the city like enormously, and so the lessons from that, I can extend your case on that one, are maybe the most important. And
that's great.
and we're now doing some of that in the South Bronx, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, because that actually is an accelerant of how you can help fix society.
And it's like a comprehensive,
but here's an amazing thing, okay, is they blame Democratic cities. Well, he's a Democratic mayor who I spoke to recently. He's fabulous, Mayor Duggan, white guy, elected by write-in votes, write-in. He kind of went house to house. In the town, 75% black. He's just so good. And I called him and said, how you doing with the unrest and violence and the stores? And he said, Jamie, our economy is terrible. The unemployment way back up again. It'd come way down. He said, but there's none of that here. I said, why not? I'm trying to get the press to write this. He said, he said, because the police here already had a very good relationship with the community, I guess community type police and stuff like that. And the black community kept out the out-of-town agitators. Oh, wow. They didn't want them in. They said, you're not doing that to our town. And so Detroit hasn't had all these problems, which I find kind of amazing and maybe a great lesson to all of us too.
That's great. That's great. So one of the things I know that you are, and thank you for that. That, like I said, the comprehensive strategy is super key. And one of the pieces I think of that strategy is, I know that you are invested, you and the firm are pretty heavily invested in leadership development, which is our core mission, right? Leadership development, in our case for Latino leaders. Tell me a little bit about the fellowship initiative. I know that's something that you all are pretty proud of.
Yeah. So that started because someone had this idea that let's take a troubled set, there's all men, but Latinx and black, that kids are like in 9th and 10th grade who by most measures aren't going to get through high school. Can we get them not just through high school, but into college? And then not just into college, but out of college. And some will go back to their communities. And so we started small, I think with 10 kids or something in LA or something like that. And that we're doing it now in the South Bronx. We've now put, I'm going to say 300 kids to the program. But in those years, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, mentoring, apprenticeships, so our own people taking their weekends, taking these kids under their wings. And you listen to some of these kids, obviously there's stories, some terrible stories about their families and crime and violence. Almost 95% have gone to college and out. Wow. They're getting a couple of got scholarships from Princeton of all places, and I've been to a couple of the graduations, and the parents, I mean, everyone's crying. Right. That they didn't expect, these kids, some will tell you, they didn't expect to live to 18. Right. And so it works. And this is a really important thing. If it really, really works, and we call it the Fellowship Initiative, not the JPMorgan Fellowship Initiative, because we want to invite other people to do the same thing. Oh, okay. And they can take our learning, so that if we could do 20 people in the South Bronx, and maybe another country does 20 people in the South Bronx, another does 20 in the South Bronx, then you start to bend that curve. You're going to make a huge difference. And one of those kids is going to go back and start a business. And as you know, I would tell among all these kids who might not have gotten through high school, there might be a Barack Obama. Yep. There might be an Albert Einstein. There might be a Jeff Bezos. There might be someone who can change the world a little bit. And so, then you're getting the best out of all of our citizens. Yeah.
What do you think is the most, of the many things you've described, what do you think is the most effective thing that JPMC is doing with the Latino community right now? And what would you say is the most crucial thing that you all still need to tackle?
So I think, we always look at two ways. There are three things, okay? One is what we do here for our own people. And that we're doing quite well. We're trained. We have, because we're global, we have a lot of people who run parts of this company who are Hispanic, Argentinian, Spanish, so that I think we're doing fine. I think we've already spoken about, the very specific stuff that JPMorgan is talking about. But I think the most important, and this thing goes to corporate social responsibility, like what is it? And honestly, CEOs don't wake up in the morning and think about show the value. Think about customers, employees, and communities. So you think of communities two ways. One is micro, which most of us have been speaking about, which is how can you help that community? But it's no different than if you own a corner bakery store, that you give your food away to a homeless shelter at the end of the day, that you might hire a kid in the summer, that you support a local religious institution, a local little league, that you take the ice off the front so some little old lady doesn't break her leg. That's community. And, if a whole town does that, that's a nicer town than a town that doesn't do that. But there's a broader sense of community, which I'm going to say, and it's much more complicated, like how do you help policy? So for example, if policy was done right, I think America would be growing a lot faster. If America was growing a lot faster, that would lift up everybody. And it would also give the country the wherewithal. You'd have more jobs, better paying jobs. You'd have wage inflation at the low end. You'd have all these various things. And the country would be richer, and you can afford better social safety nets and all these various things. That's the one we screwed up the most. So if you ask me what's going to help our society the most, get policy right. Healthcare, immigration, taxation, regulation, most about small business, that doesn't cripple small businesses, infrastructure. I mean, we can't get infrastructure built properly in this country. Education, inner city schools, and by every one of these would add a lot to growth. Immigration, people think that, a lot of you in Congress had bills that the Democrats had voted for, that I think the Schumer-McCain bill that gave a path to citizenship to the undocumented, which the law-abiding undocumented, most Americans want, obviously DACA, but immigration has been critical to America's success. And and obviously the Latino groups know this, but that it would add 0.3% to our growth if we did it right. And it's amazing to me that we can't get it passed. The last time we had immigration reform was 1986. And so, and now you have a lot of Democrats and Republicans who want to do it. And so all of these things are hurting our country. Tearing it apart, slowing down growth, reducing opportunity, and then then you can have very special programs to aid the really disadvantaged. But for God's sakes, have an agenda and policies that actually work, that do well for everybody.
Great. One last question. I mean, we're almost at time. Again, given that we're developing leaders, and again, as people often point to you as one of the most effective leaders that they've worked with or encountered, what's one piece of advice, one kind of tip that you would give to a rising professional who's trying to make their way in whatever field, who wants to achieve that kind of level of leadership and
You
effectiveness?
spend your whole life learning. Learn. It's not just high school. Like every professional is always learning. Listen to the other side. Read other people. If you're a Democrat, read George Will. Understand why libertarians think the way they do, or why. And if you're a Republican, read Tom Friedman, or read, people who are saying why our job is to lift up society. Like, have a little respect and appreciation, not just knee-jerk reactions to stuff. Earn your respect and trust every day from people. Like every interaction and things like that. Treat everyone with respect. And I think part of the goal in life is to have purpose. It's not how much money you die with; it's purpose. And did you make the world a better place while you were here? And I think when you have purpose, you also have more happiness. So
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much for being here with us, ladies and gentlemen. Jamie Dimon, it's been a real pleasure to have you here with us, and we look forward to continuing to work with
Marco.
you and to learn from all your wisdom.
Marco, thank you. It was a pleasure.